of the, I guess, key characteristics of a self-managed super fund for business owners is that they have the opportunity to effectively hold property that they run their business out of. And I sort of say, well, the birth of SMSFs have really come through small business in this country, whereby there's around $68 billion of what is around a $560 billion industry that actually sits inside commercial property for SMSFs. And its popularity over the journey has been the fact that you as a business owner have the right to enter into, to contractually buy a property. Nowadays it may be with borrowing or it could just be outright, but you have that ability to effectively use your retirement savings to acquire that asset and then ultimately rent that out on commercial terms from your self-managed super fund to your business. So your business is picking up that tax deduction for the rent, which is ultimately there to fund your retirement. So you're getting both the deductibility in the business itself, but also ultimately long-term building for your retirement as well. And that's really why the government provides such a concession within the legislative landscape, as opposed to someone in a residential sense. They certainly can't do that. You can't buy a residential property and utilise it yourself or any other relative of you. So it's a pretty big incentive, and that's why we see such popularity in the SME space in particular, through the uses of self-managed super funds to be able to provide that mechanism for them to grow their business and build their retirement savings. Yeah, certainly the ability to borrow, and these rules now are about 7 years old. We have seen these arrangements change from a legislative point of view in July of 2010. But certainly property has been the big benefactor in respect to SMSF growth and I guess those that are looking to borrow with superannuation. There's been a lot of conjecture as to whether the SMSF sector has been responsible for overinflating prices, in particular in Sydney. There was a lot of discussion last year. But the reality is commercial property, that business type premises, has certainly continued to grow very much in line with the average or the ratio of commercial to residential previously. So we're certainly seeing still a continued push for business owners to look to use commercial property within an SMSF. Now, I guess they're extending, rather than just buying it out ordinarily or through some sort of trust structure, they're now actually entering into these borrowing arrangements to actually acquire that commercial property themselves. And banks are lending anywhere between 50 and 70, not quite as much as the residential property, and potentially based on the type of property that exists as well. They might see the loan to value ratio be somewhat lower on specialist type properties, but certainly conceptually we're seeing still that strong growth in that commercial space as well. Like I said earlier, it's around sort of $68 billion sitting in the SMSF sector that deals specifically with that commercial property. Yeah, so it's probably one of the most common questions I get asked around whether you can transfer property into a superannuation fund. And I guess what we need to do is we need to break out residential property versus commercial property, because superannuation law specifically allows for the acquisition from a member or a relative or related party of that member what is called business real property, or BRP. And what that means is that a property that is wholly and exclusively used in one or more businesses, the fund is allowed to actually acquire that from a member. So let's say we've got John Citizen, he's running a widget business, and he runs that business from a property that he owns inside his trust, or he may own it himself. Because it is wholly and exclusively used in his business, there is an exception within superannuation law that allows him to acquire that from himself. There's nothing that prevents and precludes a fund going out on the weekend to auction and buying residential or commercial, but that exception to acquire it from a member only extends to that commercial property not to residential property. Now, that can be done in a couple of ways. The fund, if it has the capability to do so, could simply go and buy it off the member, off that through that related arrangement. It may enter into an arrangement to borrow to acquire that, and that's quite a popular strategy to, I guess, release some of the equity in that increased value of that commercial property. But we're also seeing more and more where we have individuals that may have paid off that property and have no debt on it, and they may want to contribute the value of that into the fund as some form of after-tax or non-concessional contribution. And again, that can certainly be the case, but we have to be wary of the contribution limits that actually underpin Australia's superannuation system as well. So for someone under the age of 65, they could contribute up to $540,000 as an after-tax contribution. So that's certainly very attractive. In a husband and wife, we're talking, a bit over $1 million, closing in on 1.1 million. But the other really important point here is that we do then have some tax concessions available to us around capital gains tax, because if it is an active asset of that individual in terms of the operation of their business, if they meet certain qualifications, they can potentially reduce or eliminate entirely that capital gain upon the eventual transfer into the superannuation fund. So it's important for business owners to be getting some specialist advice around those type of transactions if they're looking to, I guess, shift assets from one structure or themselves into superannuation. It certainly can be done, but there are a range of things: capital gains tax, stamp duty, where concessions or exemptions may also apply, GST, and a whole lot more. So again, that specialist need for advice in that space is something that I can't reiterate enough. Yeah, correct. So it comes back to the fact that it must be wholly and exclusively used in one or more businesses. So there can be some scenarios where there may be something set aside that may have a different use. So a good example of that is, let's say you've got someone that's living in and they're running a motel business. So the fact that they're living on site is absolutely core to the success and operation of that motel. So whilst the motel may be inside the fund, the fact that they may be using a room or have premises on the SMSF doesn't preclude the fact that it's not wholly and exclusively used in one or more businesses. And there are also some exceptions that relate to farmland as well, where the principal residence is on less than 2 hectares, and the primary purpose is really for farming. The fact that they live on the farm and it's owned by the fund, I guess, is not the dominant purpose of doing that. So there are some exceptions to the rule, but fundamentally it has to be used specifically for that specific purpose of wholly and exclusively to run the business. So it's an important thing to I guess, for people to get their head around, but there are certainly some variations to that too. Yeah, it typically has been, and I think I used that comment earlier on that the heartbeat of the SMSF sector has really been the SME environment, and in terms of what you can do with the commercial property. But ultimately, the drivers to the success of someone becoming a trustee of a fund is that they need to take ownership and responsibility to running their own fund. So I come back to the importance of, well, why is it that they want to do what they want to, why they might want to have a fund? And so really it's getting that purpose right. If they know and can understand the rationale as to why it would be suitable to them, they understand how those benefits may be extracted by actually doing that, and that would be part of that advice process. And then understanding what needs to be done as well, and I guess understanding the roles and responsibilities. We've got a whole new penalty regime that's come into force literally from the 1st of July this year that really provide powers to the ATO to enforce compliance with the law, and a tiered penalty program that deal with that as well. So it comes with significant responsibility. So there will certainly be business owners that don't want to take that responsibility, but we're certainly seeing a growing number of individuals becoming more engaged and taking a greater interest in them wanting to dictate how their retirement savings should be looked after and managed. And in that conversation or decision process, they're coming to the conclusion that an SMSF may be the appropriate choice.